Morning, everyone. This is Dr. Caps coming back again with our podcast and our YouTube channel, Dancing with the Darkness. If you're a first time listener today, this channel and this podcast is about real life living with CPTSD from my own personal experience, what that looks like, but also from a clinician's point of view, as I have become a traumatologist and clinician to start helping people with this. Learning from my own experiences, especially in my own healing. And it's also a message of hope. It's not just us hashing out all of the bad things with CPTSD and wallowing in that, but I want you to leave each episode with a message of hope. That no matter what happens or has happened to you, you can make a choice to have a good life and to thrive and not just survive. So, if you're, for those that are listeners and continue to support the channel, thank you so much. The only way that anyone hears this is when you like or share one of these episodes. And we are simply here to help people with CPTSD. We are world famous for not getting any help. And usually by the time we do decide to get help, it's too late. We're either at the point where we want to take our own lives, or we have basically destroyed everything in our life because of our tendencies, okay? So I'm trying to throw some of this out there and mitigate some of it for those of you that are listening with CPTSD, and there's still time for you to make a conscious choice and to heal and to move forward. So I had all kinds of ideas floating in my mind about what today's episode was going to be about. I actually was on vacation, which I don't take vacation, but I was actually on a vacation at a very peaceful place and had a lot of time to look introspectively at myself and my own life and where I wanted to move forward. And things popped up, and I believe that any pain that you feel should be turned into purpose. So really, this episode is sparked from some of my own pain, but you make purpose out of your pain, and that's what this whole thing is about. That's what Dancing with the Darkness is. That's what everything that I do is about, is trying to turn anything that's going on in my life or has happened into something that's going to help someone else. And so today I want to talk about one of the things that we deal with CPTSD especially, and it's emotional dysregulation. And I know that we've touched on this before, but I want to come at it with a different perspective. Okay, so let's just go over some of the details about what this dysregulated emotion looks like, so that those of you that have never listened to the podcast and haven't heard what I've talked about, this is a fresh start for you. And so what happens is, as a young child, when we are subject to abuse, and we've talked about this in past episodes if you want to know more, especially with a disorganized attachment, what happens is that our caregivers are very inconsistent, and it's very, very confusing for us. Okay, so they may be someone that offers nurturing and comfort 1 minute, but then it can drastically change and they become exactly the opposite, and they become horrifically abusive and cause us physical, mental, and spiritual pain. And so these inconsistencies for a young child that has a developing brain, this breeds this emotional dysfunction because we have not been taught and we do not learn what emotions look like. What is a healthy way of expressing those? We just don't know. It's very, very confusing, and that's thus the word disorganized, because it is disorganized. We don't know how to conceptualize these emotions. We don't know how to put them even into words. We don't even understand what our body and our brain is doing. It's very, very confusing. And, in 2019, they did some pretty excessive studies on this when we were looking, heavily at attachment injury and stuff like that, and somatic attachment. These therapy models develop over time, and we look heavily at one thing and we focus on it, and then we move on to the next. Unfortunately, it's a plethora of a bunch of things. I call it an onion because that's what it speaks to me, is all the layers of an onion. And so there's all these layers of the onion. But in 2019, they did do some pretty extensive studies, and they found that, believe it or not, even though we develop emotions a little bit earlier, around 4, we start, emulating our parents, our caregivers, and trying to learn what does mad look like, or what does dad or mom do when they're upset. We start modeling some of that, but we see the greatest impact between the ages of 6 and 10 as far as our psychological development and the way that the brain is forming. This is when we really start seeing the amygdala hijacks. We start seeing hippocampus activity, hypothalamus activity. We see prefrontal cortex that's trying desperately to start developing, get all screwed up. And so we need to understand that this is a chemistry changing experience. It is a brain altering experience. It is a developmental problem. And that's why we call it developmental trauma as a kid or as a child. Okay? We need to understand that the brain doesn't fully mature until you're 25 years old. So you do not have all of your faculties online until you're 25. So if you're a child that's been dealing with this in your home from your caregivers, and if you look at past episodes and you look at my story, you can see how that works, the inconsistency, the disorganization from each caregiver, the different set of circumstances, the environments continuing to change. In the Marine Corps, it's famous, they say that you need to improvise, adapt, and overcome. And, that's great. You're out there, I've been in the field many, many times, and been in austere situations, and you get an op order, and then you get a frago, and then you get a warna. I mean, they constantly want you thinking on your feet. Then you when I went airborne and different things, it was more of that. You had to think on your feet. So part of me had an advantage in that because I literally grew up in that environment, that I had to improvise, adapt, and overcome all the time. I never knew what was going to happen. I don't know, is mom going to be nice today? Is mom going to be drunk today? Is dad going to yell at me today? Is something going to happen at work that pisses him off and he's going to have a short fuse? Is he going to want to hug me, or is he going to want to hit me? Never did. And so this breeds that disorganized attachment, and this emotional dysregulation. Okay, we don't know what to do. And this doesn't just happen as a child, this can happen as an adult as well. Okay? And so I'm going to give you two sides of the coin. I want to show you what it looks like for the person with the dysregulated emotions and what they're doing to try to heal. And then I want to show you what people on the outside need to be conscious of. If they love this person, if they want to be with this person romantically, if they want to be their friend, whatever, they need to know how should I show up for this person with the CPTSD? What can I do to make life better for them? Okay, and so for the person with this emotional dysregulation, this can carry on, and it carried on for me all the way up to 50 years old. That there were elements of me that had emotional dysregulation. The first thing I had to overcome, and have had to overcome for years, is immediately going to anger. This is how I was taught. This is what I modeled. This is what I saw in my household. And then, military and everything else, it kind of reinforced that anger, rage, violence is the answer. And it's not. It really, really isn't. We need to learn how to process these emotions for what they are. We need to experience grief when there's grieving to do. When there's a loss, we need to know that sadness is okay. We need to know that that deep feeling of remorse of that loss. We need to understand what disappointment looks like. We need to understand what being hurt by someone else looks like. Okay, instead of it always being anger, we need to understand that it's a wound, and we need to work on taking care of the wound. And anger doesn't solve that. It may give you some immediate release, this false sense of revenge or whatever it is, but even like an animal that's in a fight, they still have to go off to their den and lick their wounds and try to heal and recover. And so that's what we need to understand is what that recovery should look like, versus what it often does look like. And usually, that cliche expression of hurt people, we really need to stop saying that, because it offers an excuse in a way. Okay? Oh, they're hurt, so they hurt someone else. Well, we got to stop these excuses. We've got to start taking accountability and extreme ownership of who we are and what we do to damage other human beings. I mean, this is, if you want to grow up, if you want to be mature, and if you want to heal, the very first thing you're going to have to do is realize what you have power over and what you don't. And whatever you don't have power over, you need to get help. You need to get help with learning how to regulate that. For me, I rely heavily on God, and the reason why that I see a lot of people with CPTSD or PTSD or even operator syndrome turn to God, because God is the only one that's bigger than all of this. He's the only one that shows up with consistency. He's the only one that does everything that he says and backs it up with his word and his promises, and he's faithful and loyal to us no matter what we do. He forgives us no matter what we do. He accepts our flaws, and that's the only one that's going to do that. We cannot expect other human beings to offer us that, because honestly, we're setting ourselves up for failure. That is an unrealistic expectations, and often we get hurt with CPTSD, especially when we have expectations that are not realistic. Okay, we need to understand that there's elements of the inner and the outer critic that do tell the truth, and this is why it's so hard. It's literally like taking a tiger out of a cage every day and then having to put it back in. And I've heard people use that expression when they were talking about eating disorders, because we have to eat to survive, but yet it's so hard to fight, whether it's binge eating or anorexia or these other things. When I did eating disorder treatment for 5 years, we ran into that a lot, because it's very hard to regulate something that is essential for you to survive. Well, I feel that emotions are equally difficult. We have to have emotions in order to interact with other individuals, to have relationships, to have socialization, to not be lonely, to have those physical, mental, and spiritual needs met. Okay? So it's very, very difficult to be created in God's image as a social being, as someone that was designed to love, that was designed to care for other people, and to be deprived of that, not only because other people can't give it to you, but because you are so dysregulated, you can't show up in the relationship in a healthy way enough for them to give it to you. Oftentimes we have people that come along and they may have secure attachment, they may be healthy, and we don't know what to do with that because of the inner and the outer critic. The inner critic telling us that we are unlovable and we are not good enough for another individual to love. And then the outer critic showing up and telling us that everyone outside of us is not safe. And see, there's elements there that are true. And this is what I'm talking about with taking that tiger out of the cage and having to put it back in. It's very, very difficult because there are parts of us that need improvement. Okay, and so that inner critic is telling the truth about some things. There's some things that maybe we haven't fixed. There are some things that we need to work on, okay? But it doesn't have to be catastrophic, and it doesn't have to mean that you're unlovable. It's about taking accountability and taking ownership of who we are and what we do. And that is a healthy thing, because that helps us improve. We see that our God in heaven, what he does is he doesn't punish us with guilt or shame. Guilt and shame comes from other people, and it's sickness and it's illness, and it destroys us. God uses conviction. He likes to tell us gently in love that what we're doing is wrong, and he does it because he doesn't want us to get hurt or to harm someone else. It's no different from a parent when You tell your kid, don't touch the hot stove, and then they touch it anyway. And then you react, right? Because number one, they didn't do what you told them to do. Okay. Number two, there's fear in there. There's all kinds of emotions in there when your kid burns his hand on the stove. Okay. Now, if you're an unhealthy, dysregulated person like my parents were, the very first thing you're going to do is react with anger. You're going to yell at the child for not listening to you, or even spank the child. Okay. Now, the child doesn't need that right now. They need comfort. They have burned themselves. They are in pain. Okay. So you see how that works. This is that disorganized and very dysregulated emotions that live within us. Okay. And I remember that as a child, that my dad would react that way often. If I got a skinned knee or had a headache or threw up or whatever, he would yell at me first. And it was because he had fear. He had a sense of inadequacy as a parent, not knowing what to do. And it all manifested in anger because that's all that he knew. And so as a child, you can learn one of two things, right? You can either learn to suck it up and never tell him anything because you're afraid, okay? Or you can try to find comfort elsewhere if it's available. So my option was there was no comfort available, and so I had to suck it up. If I was sick, I had to keep it to myself. If I had a headache, I had to keep it to myself. You know, all of those things. Well, this is a problem because we go into adulthood and we're still that same person. And we neglect ourselves. We don't do any self-care. And we show up in relationships as the martyr or the sacrificial lamb, and we give everything to everyone else, and we don't take care of ourselves. And oftentimes we end up with either a narcissist or an abusive person in a relationship, and they suck it up like a sponge, and they love it because they think that the world revolves around them, and you're supposed to sacrifice for them. You're supposed to eat scraps, and they eat the filet mignon. I mean, that's the way that it goes. And so that trend continues, right? Because we're not healing. We're not changing. We're not doing anything to improve ourselves or to set boundaries and those that we bring into our life. Okay? So some of these things we have to take ownership of, and we have to have accountability. Okay? We are accountable to take care of ourselves. Okay? The older I get, the more mature I get, and the more I heal, I'm starting to understand that there is a level of self-care that I have to do because I am dependent upon by others. Okay? I have to try to keep myself healthy, at least, because there's people dependent on my income. There's people that are dependent on me at work, wherever, right? And so part of that is something that I had to take ownership of, and was to realize that sometimes it's okay to do for yourself without this guilt and shame of it being selfish. And I'm going to be honest with you, this is a work in progress, and this is something that I still struggle with. Okay, so I'm not going to sit here and be fraudulent or hypocritical with you and tell you that, oh yeah, you know, Monday I woke up and all of a sudden I'm this new person. No, it takes effort, it takes work, but it can be done. Okay, so I want you to be conscious of the fact that it is a work in progress, and we have to work at it. Okay, it's not something that's going to just change like that. Okay, so this is one thing that I've had to learn to be accountable of. The other part is I have to take extreme ownership and accountability of what comes out of me. Okay, I can't just yell at my kid or be nasty to my spouse or crappy to a coworker and then go, oh, well, you know, hurt people hurt people. No, I can't do that. I can't make excuses for myself, okay? I need to be strong enough and humble enough to acknowledge my error and to ask for forgiveness. And that's all that we can do, and that's all that we're required to do. God immediately forgives when we repent, and then individuals have to make a choice if they're going to forgive or not. That's the way that it works. They're either going to forgive or they're not. That becomes accountable to them at that point once we have tried to make amends and we have asked for forgiveness. The important thing is that you are making and molding a new person within yourself, and you're learning that, hey, I'm going to make mistakes, but that does not mean that the inner critic is 100% right. It doesn't mean that I'm unlovable, that I can't be in a relationship, that no one's ever going to understand me, no one's ever going to love me, I'm defective, I'm broken. Whatever you're thinking, whatever that inner critic is telling you, those are lies. Okay? Now, the conviction that we feel that, hey, you know what, I shouldn't have said that, that's wrong, that's a healthy thing. It's an agent of change. It changes the paradigm of our life, and it's good for us to be able to have humility. And really, that is the ultimate maturity and emotional regulation, is for us to be able to go without fear, without anger, without resentment, and go to someone and say, hey, you know what? I really had a bad moment. I shouldn't have done that. I apologize. You didn't deserve that. I'm not going to make any excuses for what I did. I hope that you'll forgive me, and I'm trying to do better. And that's how we show up as an adult. And I know that it's hard, because adults that still have this dysregulated sense of emotions, they still show up in relationships unhealthily. And I'm going to give you some examples, okay? I'm going to give you some examples from my own life that I deal with, okay? Grown adults will punish you, okay, when their needs aren't being met. They can do this by, dismissing you, acting like your feelings don't matter, ignoring you, not talking to you. They can have a meltdown. They can have a temper tantrum. I've seen it all. I've seen people my age act like a child. And that's because, in a lot of ways, they are still very childlike and immature in their emotions and in that regulation, because they've never learned or taken the time or made the decision to work on that. And so we've talked about that part of it. Now I want to talk about a little bit about how difficult it is to be the healing individual with CPTSD and the relationships that we have in life, and how it's very hard to overcome inner and outer critic when these things are happening to us. Okay, so I don't want you, this is going to resonate. If you've got CPTSD and you're listening to this, it's going to resonate, because it sure as hell does with me, and it still happens. And so this may be a little bit of a trigger warning for you. This may touch you in a deep way. And I want you to understand that this isn't meant to hurt you. This is meant to help you. And for you to understand that these struggles, these feelings, these things that you're dealing with are normal. They're absolutely normal for a person that's dealt with what you've dealt with, okay? So the first thing I want you to do is do not listen to the inner critic at all. When I start talking about this and the inner critic starts pointing the finger at you and telling you that you are defective and you're the problem and everything's your fault, you need to tell him to shut up. And you need to really listen to what I'm trying to say here, and you need to process it. Okay? When we get into relationships, whether it's friendships, intimate relationships, it doesn't matter what it is, and people show up inconsistently, or they say one thing and they do another, or they don't do what they say, okay? This is going to be severely amplified with us with CPTSD, because we have become highly sensitive people. We are normally very empathic, and we have a very strict code, a very, very high bar that we have set for ourselves, okay? Because we do not ever want to be those people that hurt us. So we are overachievers. Our integrity means absolutely everything to us. We will go to painstakingly, almost death effort to keep our word, to do what we say, to keep our promises, and to be consistent. And when I say consistent, I mean with everything. You're the people that show up for work every single day, whether you're sick or not. You're the people that always do what you're supposed to do, right? There's all these rules, and 90% of the people you work with are like, rules, smalls, whatever. You are a stickler, right? We do every single thing we're told, and then often we start feeling some resentment towards everybody around us, because you're like, why am I doing this? And they're not, and there's no accountability on them. And so this can trip us up. It can trip us up. It can make us feel bad about ourselves. And then the outer critic comes in and it starts making us feel bad about everybody else. The point being, we are in control of and accountable and need to take ownership of ourselves. We are not responsible for everyone around us and what they do, and we cannot expect them to live to the standard that we live to. This is going to drive you crazy, because it drives me crazy. And now I'm in more of a leadership role at work, and the employees that I have that are like me and probably have some CPTSD, and they have a moral code and they try to do things right, they get very frustrated at other individuals that don't. And I found myself in a counseling and a nurturing role with my subordinates, trying to help them understand that no one can take their integrity away from them. They need to keep that. They can't let the bad around them change who they are at their core. That two wrongs don't make a right. And if they start doing what these other guys are doing, they're literally stooping down to that level, and they're changing who they are to be like everyone else. And we shouldn't do that. Folks that have that integrity, that have that value system, are getting rarer and rarer. And I would hope and pray that society would start recognizing that and rewarding and nurturing these individuals for who they are. But that's probably an unrealistic expectation as well, because the paradigm shift in the work environment alone is more about how much can I get out of an employee, and we don't care if we burn them out or not, we'll just replace them. It's not about longevity and loyalty and honesty and integrity, and you know, it used to be that way, but it's not anymore. And so we need to understand the society that we walk in cannot be conducive to health with us mentally, physically, and spiritually if we allow it to interfere with our own healing and our own development. We need to understand that in relationships, most people have experienced trauma. Most people are at different levels of healing in their own journey. And we have to be very realistic about what we expect with people in relationships, okay? Because when they don't show up consistently, or when they are dismissive, or when they have meltdowns, or when they make you feel like your feelings don't matter, and all of these things that in a lot of ways can be considered emotional abuse, there's a level of that we can take control of and understand that we don't have to deal with, okay? There's boundaries that can be put in place to basically let the individuals know around you that this is your line and you're not going to cross it. And that's not being selfish. It's not being narcissistic. It's self-preservation. Because if you are going to continue to heal, if you are continue to show up the way you need to show up for the people around you, that's part of that self-preservation that you need to do. Okay? There are going to be times in your life where your walls finally break down, and you're going to make a choice to trust and be vulnerable. And it's going to go one of two ways. You know, either God has sent you this amazing person that is going to nurture that and appreciate that and love that about you, and they're going to protect that part of you, which is going to help you become an even more healthy person and make you even better. But there's also the risk that you could be vulnerable at the wrong time, or you could be, excessively vulnerable, because that's what we do sometimes with CPTSD, is that we overshare and we become vulnerable way too quick. And this can be very damaging to you. And the reason why is because it's the cognitive part of the brain is processing that there is consistency here, but the consistency is that for 50 years I've been treated this way, starting with my parents. Okay? And so the cognitive part, the rational part of the brain, is actually trying to tell you, see, I told you so. See, I told you so. That's that outer critic. And he's pulling up lots of evidence to support those beliefs, to support that, hey, everybody on the outside of you is dangerous. Everybody on the outside of you can hurt you, okay? And then there's this fear with the inner critic of, can I survive that, okay? Because we've been in a state of anxiety and fear and depression for so long that we're so desperate to get out of that we overprotect ourselves out of that sheer terror of, how am I going to survive this loss? How am I going to survive allowing myself to be vulnerable and loving and whatever, and then I get betrayed, or I get dismissed, or I get mistreated, and how am I going to survive that? Many times I have felt like that was just the make it or break it, that's going to be, how I lose the dance to the darkness. This is how I lose the dance to the darkness, is if I go into this and I allow this to happen, you know what? I'm done. You know? And I have felt that way as recently as this morning. And I had to take extreme ownership and accountability and do a personal inventory. And I had to say, you know what? I may not have a lot of followers on this channel. I don't know how many listeners I have, but every Sunday I release a video, and there may be somebody out there that needs to hear this. There may be somebody out there that is going through the same thing, and I feel like this is my mission. This is my what I was crafted to do by God, was to turn my pain into purpose and help someone out there. And so that's why I had to make this video today. And I said, you know what? We're going to make a video about what's going on right now so that these people can see the genuineness and they can see the passion and they can see that this is very, very real, that this isn't scripted. This isn't something I'm reading out of a book. This is life. And so I'm really hoping that today's video had an impact on you. It's not meant to hurt you. It's meant to help you, because there's a level of control that we do still have. There's a level of accountability and self-examination that we still need to do about ourselves. But we also need to unload the rocks that we're carrying in our rucksack that are other people and what they do, because we literally have no control over that. Okay? It's between them and God. And what are they doing? What are they doing? Are they looking within themselves? Are they looking introspectively? Are they doing what they need to do to heal in order to not hurt the people around them? That's on them. That's not on us. All we can do is follow what Christ told us to do. He said to love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, and mind, and to love your neighbor as yourself. Okay? And so if we're going to show up for our neighbor in a healthy way, we do have to figure out how to love ourselves enough so that we can show up and love our neighbor the way that we should. I really hope today spoke to you. It absolutely spoke to me as I was saying it, because it was something I needed to process myself. This is a very real, uncut, unscripted podcast and channel. If you're a return listener, you probably already know that. If you think this is going to help somebody, if you know somebody in your life that's going through something like this, please just share the video. I don't care if they come to me for counseling. It doesn't matter. I just want them to get help. I want them to get help, whatever that looks like. Even if it's just listening to these videos and it gets them off the edge. Because with CPTSD, it is a dance with the darkness, and we stand at the edge a lot. So you could be saving a life today just by sharing this message. Keep that in mind. Thank you so much for return listeners. We appreciate your support so much. That's what keeps us going. Please like, comment, share. Let us know what you think. We'll see you next time. God bless.